Naruto does not have a lot of plot holes, contrary to what many people in the community would like you to believe. And while I'm not one to try and obfuscate valid criticism, I genuinely believe that the amount of plot holes within the series is negligible, as with most other long-running shonen, and most of said plot holes are born from either a lack of critical thinking or just straight up misinformation. And while that wasn't directed at him, today we're going to be going over this video by a much larger Naruto creator, NCHammer, where he goes into a myriad of plot holes that supposedly ruin Naruto. But before we get into my video, I want to make it clear that I won't be using any clips from his video, so if you want to watch it for yourself, I'll leave a link to the original video in the description down below. I'll try my best to address his points as honestly and fairly as possible, but these situations are obviously gonna hold an inherent bias both ways, so I recommend watching his video first before watching mine. Anyway, that's pretty much it for the intro. Make sure to like and subscribe for more. We're shooting for 10k by the end of this year. Let's get on with the video. So I've been around the Naruto community for quite a long time, and if I'm being 100% honest, this first plot hole genuinely caught me by surprise. The general premise of this plot hole is that it makes no sense for Itachi to remain sick, given that there are supposedly other viable methods to cure his illness. Nick postulates that given Itachi's access to Izanagi, then it makes zero sense that he didn't try to use it to cure his illness, given its reality warping capabilities. However, this line of logic really overestimates Izanagi itself, as well as Itachi's own capabilities with it. When Izanagi was first introduced, it was described as an ultimate genjutsu cast upon oneself that blurs the border between fantasy and reality, where anything that is disadvantageous to the caster, damage, or even death can be rewritten, and anything advantageous such as the caster's attacks are kept as part of reality. This is further corroborated by Itachi, who states that if something doesn't go the way you want to, you can erase that outcome and start all over. Ultimately, you can pick and choose the most desirable end result. Now, when you look at what Izanagi is stated to do and what Nick claims it can do, you see the huge disparity in its capabilities. The Izanagi is not total reality manipulation, and the series explicitly and implicitly outlines the limitations for the jutsu. In chapter 510, Obito explains that only those who possess both Uchiha and Senju powers can perform the Izanagi. And before you start typing about how that makes zero sense, seeing as though the entire reason as to why the Izanami was invented was to stop the regular Uchiha from going crazy with Izanagi, this is actually a mistranslation. The actual Japanese kanji used there is actually yuru sareru, which is the passive form of the verb yurusu, which means to allow or permit. Essentially, what it's saying is that from Obito's perspective, only those with both Uchiha and Senju powers are allowed or permitted to use the Izanagi, rather than them being physically incapable of doing so without them. This is most likely information given to him by Madara or the Uchiha Stone Tablet, with the latter being more likely since Hagoromo made the tablet to correct the Uchiha's thinking, and as we just established, Izanagi literally made them go crazy. But that's not really relevant for this discussion, since all we really want to establish is the fact that the technique itself is limited by whether the caster possesses both the different powers. Because remember, the Izanagi is only a practical application, or more aptly a watered down version of the creation of all things, which is actually reality manipulation. But even with both Uchiha and Senju powers, it stated that Danzo, who had an entire arm of Hashirama cells, could only manage an incomplete Izanagi and was still unable to control Hashirama's power. It's also clear that even with both powers, Danzo couldn't fully manipulate reality and create new things, only restore recent damage or recreate himself as he was right before his death, since that was all he was able to do. If Danzo was able to just give himself new eyes and recreate himself as he pleased, he would have just brought himself back to his physical prime, given himself back his blind Sharingans, or simply wished Sasuke away instead of having a prolonged battle. It's clear that the Izanagi doesn't allow you to do anything other than rewrite yourself to the point right before you died or before you took damage, and based on what I've seen, the only one that can do something like that is the actual creation of all things, which Naruto, someone vastly stronger than Danzo and Itachi, could only use to create a regular eye for Kakashi and not even a Sharingan. So with Itachi using only an offshoot of an actual reality manipulation technique, while not having the necessary powers to fully utilize it, as well as it being shown to not provide provide anything but immediate restorations, it's pretty unreasonable to assume that Itachi could cure his long-time sickness with it. If Danzo couldn't do all of these things with Hashirama cells, then I don't see why Itachi could. The next plot hole that Nick brought up was the idea that it made zero sense for Kurama to help Naruto. There are multiple points within Naruto where Kurama goes out of his way to help him, and since his plan was presumably to escape and rampage, it would be in his best interest to just let Naruto die, given that he would reform eventually. However, this is a huge misunderstanding of Kurama's goals or lack thereof. You see, although Kurama wanted to be free, he was never in a rush to be free, nor was it implied that he needed to be in a specific time frame. Kurama is an immortal chakra beast trapped in the body of a mortal human with nothing better to do. As a matter of fact, the first time we actually see Naruto take Kurama's chakra, Kurama gives it to him because he thought it was amusing that Naruto would be bold enough to ask the Nine Tails for chakra. And based on this interaction, it's implied that Naruto had never even interacted with Kurama up until this point, which means that Kurama was laying dormant for the past 12 years by his own volition. Kurama is shown to be able to torment his Jinchuriki in their sleep, so Naruto not even known of the Nine Tails' existence in his body up until this point solidifies the fact that escaping was not something at the forefront of his mind. But that's not to say that Kurama didn't want to escape, he was just going about it in a different way that was a lot more conducive to his ideology at the time. Kurama is someone who believes himself to be hatred itself, and in doing so he developed this complex where he tries to get people to join in his darkness. This is evidenced by Kurama tempting Naruto to use his power against Sasuke in the Tenji Bridge, and when Naruto tried taking it during the Waterfall of Truth training, where Kurama seeped his hatred into Naruto, causing him to fall into darkness. But because the more chakra that Naruto takes from the Nine Tails, the more the seal unravels, it becomes easier for the Nine Tails to take control of his body. However, he doesn't just want control, he wants submission, specifically submission to hatred. This is why Kurama was so fond of Dark Naruto, because he was the manifestation of all of Naruto's anger and hatred. Essentially, instead of just letting Naruto die, Kurama used Naruto's near-death experiences and his repressed emotions to tempt him into using his chakra, effectively binding himself to his hatred. This would eventually lead to the seal being undone, giving Kurama full access to Naruto's body, allowing him to transform at will, causing harm to Naruto's loved ones with his own body. And for the record, when we say the seal is being undone, it doesn't mean that Kurama is leaving Naruto's body. That's another misconception. Within Naruto, there are presumably layers to a seal, and we know this since we see Naruto fully open the seal twice. The first was during the fight against the Nine Tails to acquire KCM, and the second was when he became friends with Kurama to unlock KCM 2. In both instances, Naruto undid the seal and opened the gate, but Kurama didn't just leave his body. However, this is a topic for another video. The main takeaway is that Kurama just didn't want to be free, he had ulterior motives. Now this next plot hole is a really popular one, and suffice to say it's already been debunked numerous times, but for the sake of this video I'll give the basic rundown. The premise of this plot hole is that it makes zero sense for Madara to use Kamui as the Ten Tails Jinchuriki, given that Obito couldn't. Nick's explanation for this is because Madara is just better at using Kamui, but that sort of reasoning is unnecessary given what we know. This is because Obito never said that he couldn't use Kamui. What he did say is that with the Ten Tails inside of him, he couldn't pass through things, which is just one of Kamui's 3 abilities, i.e. the phasing ability. And without getting into too much detail, the base ability of Kamui for both eyes is to create an immediate portal that can transfer nearby objects and oneself, which is why Kakashi could Kamui himself out of and into the Kamui dimension. The left eye, on the other hand, specifically allows you to extend the range and effectively warp away distant or large objects, as seen with Kakashi sniping away Deidara's arms and when he sucks in the entire 8 Tails. The right eye, however, gives the user the unique ability to phase through solid objects, which for the record is its own specific ability that is cast passively upon oneself. This is why when Obito goes intangible, you don't see the signature spiral warping that is present when using Kamui normally. So when Obito says he can't pass through things, he isn't saying he cannot use Kamui as a whole, he just cannot use that specific aspect. But that leaves us with the question of why. My personal theory is that this has to do with the presence of the God Tree or the Ghetto statue within Obito. You see, Jinchuriki of the Ten Tails are different to other Jinchurikis for the fact that to seal them within yourself, you also have to seal the Ghetto statue inside you as well, since the Ghetto statue is what houses the Nine-Tailed Beast before transforming into the Ten Tails. The Geto statue or God tree is its own sentient entity, which means that its presence may be the one keeping Obito tangible since it's inside of him, but that doesn't really matter either way, the point still stands. But speaking of silly theories, this next plot hole had me on the floor dying of laughter. Now to be fair, the premise itself makes sense in theory, but in practice it's just completely non-viable. The argument is basically that it's a plot hole that Naruto didn't use the Toad Baton to beat the nature energy out of Madara. Now I want you to think about that for half a second. Who on the battlefield is gonna be the one to hit Madara enough times to knock out the nature energy he got from Hashirama? Who? Naruto, the one who casually got his tail beast taken, or Sasuke who was getting weaved then put on a selfie stick by Madara? Like, no. Madara at that point in the series was just way too powerful for anybody to even fight him, much less hit him multiple times with a baton. However, this next plot hole is by far the best one yet. Essentially, this plot hole is based on the fact that Danzo didn't try to become Hokage after Hiruzen died. And initially, when writing this script, I was pretty stumped since on the surface this seems pretty cut and dry. However, after rereading certain sections of the manga, it becomes a lot more clear why we didn't see him going after the title of Hokage at that point in time. In chapter 140 of the Naruto manga, the two elders came to Jiraiya, who was already in the village at the time, to relay some important information following the death of Hiruzen. Due to Orochimaru's attack, the village's strength was at an all-time low, and thus they created an emergency council with the express purpose of dealing with the fallout. However, they were lacking the most important part, a strong and trustworthy leader, emphasis on strong and trustworthy. Remember, the Hokage is supposed to be the strongest in the village, as well as someone who is acknowledged by the people, which is why the candidates that were chosen were the legendary Sannin, since they were the most powerful shinobi in the Leaf at the time, and were students of Hiruzen, so ideologically they were in line with the village, or at least for the most part. We even see in the meeting to discuss the selection of the 6th Hokage that both power and virtue were taken into consideration in choosing the candidate. On the other hand, not only was Danzo not the strongest in the village, he was the leader of the Hawk faction that literally fought against the previous Hokage, and not only that, he was the founder of Root, the organization that was involved in numerous child experiments, with Yamato being the result of it. As a matter of fact, the only reason why Danzo was able to even become the temporary 6th Hokage was due to poor handling of all the major Leaf catastrophes, allowing Danzo to make a case that Hiruzen's way of doing things was actually detrimental to the village. This was enough to convince the daimyo to try something new, and it's only after this that Danzo was given the position. And touching back onto what the elders said, for Danzo to even have a shot at taking over after Hiruzen, he would have to be at the emergency meeting with the Fire Daimyo, which not only would you not be able to prove that, there was actually evidence that he could not have been there. For one, just like I said earlier, he was the leader of a faction that directly opposed Hiruzen, but not only that, the daimyo didn't even consider him a candidate. When mulling over his regret of not getting Jiraiya to be the 5th Hokage, he questions if anyone else was there to fill the position, with Danzo literally in the room. If Danzo was present at the initial meeting, or even knew of the initial meeting after Hiruzen's death, then the daimyo would have already known of Danzo and his stance on Hiruzen's way of doing things, which means that not only was Danzo not even taken into consideration, he most likely wasn't even aware of the decision or complications leading up to it until the new Hokage was announced. And speaking about complications, this next plot hole is kind of not a plot hole by definition. The general premise is that Madara's plan of grooming Obito to groom Nagato to bring him back to life makes no sense from a planning standpoint and thus constitutes a plot hole. However, definitionally, this does not constitute a plot hole. A plot hole is an inconsistency within a story where something that is established earlier is contradicted with zero in-universe explanation, and in this scenario, nothing is being contradicted. At most, it would be just poor planning on Madara's part, or simply just bad writing. Madara being dumb in this aspect is not a plot hole, and I would argue that this being a large oversight for him falls in line with his character given his theme of hubris. As it relates to the situation as a whole, I can understand that some of the things that happen are extremely convenient, but we know that Madara psychologically broke down Obito, brainwashed him, and put a seal on his heart to make him a puppet. This is coupled with the fact that he left Obito with Zetsu, who he believed to be his will, someone that would essentially make sure that his plan went into fruition even if he didn't know his true identity at the time. The only real problem is the state in which Madara would have been revived. If we go by how Nagato's Rinne Rebirth works, then the Madara that would have been revived would have been an old decrepit Madara, and the point that Nick made was that if he was gonna be revived as an old man, then there would be no reason for him to unplug himself from the God Tree since it was keeping him alive as an old man anyway. However, we don't really know how long Madara was connected to the God Tree for, and if we're going off of this interpretation through inductive reasoning, then it would just be the case that the God Tree could not keep him alive indefinitely. There is also the fact that he was gonna seal the 10 tails into himself upon revival, so it wouldn't really matter at what age he was brought back since he would have the power of the 10 tails at his disposal. And as I said, this really is just a matter of whether or not it suspends your own personal disbelief, which doesn't mean it contradicts anything previously established. This next one is one that I've already addressed in my Daigon Eye debunk video, so if you want to see a full breakdown, then check it out in the description down below. Otherwise, I'll give a quick rundown. The basic idea is that it makes no sense for Naruto to be in the same year group as the Rookie 9 since he failed the examinations 3 times. The argument is that if this was the case, then Naruto would have to be 3 years older than everyone, which he is verifiably not, which makes this a plot hole. The problem is that this argument presupposes that the examinations are yearly, which is something that is never stated or implied. As of now, we barely have any information on the Elite Shinobi educational system, so for all we know, the examinations could be quarterly, at the request of the student, or whatever system you may think of. Since we don't know the specifics, it opens up the possibility of Naruto taking the exam multiple times when he just entered the academy trying to prove himself, which works narratively within the series. Remember, a plot hole is a contradiction of something previously established. If nothing was previously established, then nothing can be contradicted, and thus whatever in-world interpretation that allows for the story to work would then be the conclusion. For the next one, however, it requires a bit more reading and understanding to grasp the actual situation. The basic premise is that it makes no sense that no one knew that Naruto was Minato's son, and at face value the arguments that Nick makes holds up, but with a tiny bit of reading it becomes a little more clear. To understand where I'm coming from, you first need to unlearn the misconception that every piece of known information in Naruto is public knowledge, because that is completely asinine, especially when it comes to Bijou. And we know for a fact that information surrounding the Jinchuriki and Bijou are kept under tight regulation. In chapter 256, Kakashi tells us that in Konoha, information about the nine-tailed fox is top secret, and even Sakura, the pupil of the 5th Hokage, wasn't even aware of the official designation of the tailed beast, that being the term Bijou. This is also consistent with Shikamaru, one of the smartest persons within the series, telling Dan that the adults seem to call Naruto a Jinchuriki, implying that this was information that he wasn't privy to. The point that I'm trying to establish is that this information is not public knowledge, or at the very least isn't meant to be public knowledge. Which is why when I say that most people do not know about Kushina or her marriage to Minato, it comes from a place of actual understanding, because most of this plot hole requires people to know information they realistically shouldn't know. For one, most people did not know Kushina existed, and this is because, as we said, information about the Nine Tails is top secret, and in the Minato one-shot it's established that Kushina was confined to only a certain section of the village. This isn't to say that she never left, as she literally does in the same one-shot, but only to sneak out, or in the Naruto manga to see her friend Mito. This greatly reduced the amount of people that would possibly know of her existence, but even if her existence was public knowledge, that doesn't mean that her purpose was public as well. Kushina herself was shocked that she was chosen to be the Nine-Tails vessel, since by her own words, everything was top secret. Her also being Minato's wife doesn't really mean anything, since Minato could have just been married in secret, and there is no reason to believe that their relation had to be public knowledge. You would have to assume that to be the case, which I don't see a reason for doing that. But let's say their relationship was public knowledge and the villagers knew Kushina was pregnant, which is highly unlikely since only one person that wasn't a Konoha official knew, but for the sake of the argument, let's just assume that they do know. Well, for one, they don't know how far along Kushina is on her pregnancy, and Kushina gave birth to Naruto in a shrine outside the Lee village, which means that from the perspective of the villagers, Kushina died while pregnant with Naruto, which means that they would think that he died along with her. There's also the fact that the villagers thought that Naruto was literally the Nine Tails, A misconception that a lot of people have is that the villagers hated Naruto for being a Jinchuriki, which is correct on a technical basis, but they actually hated him because they thought that he was the sealed state of the demon fox. Both Mizuki and Ebisu refer to Naruto as the nine-tailed fox, and Mizuki says that Minato trapped and bound the nine-tails into the form of Naruto, which means that from his and the villagers' perspective, Naruto was just the nine-tails in human form. And if this was their perspective, then they would have never seen Naruto as Minato's son, no matter how much they look similar to him. From their perspective, what happened was that the nine-tails killed their loved ones and their beloved leader, then after being sealed into the form of a kid, he stole the likeness of their leader that died sealing him. Imagine if I walked into your house, shot your mom, then your dad used magic to turn me into a kid at the cost of his life, but I turned into a baby with his face. No matter how much I looked like your dad, you would never think that we're related since you know that I'm just some dude. And speaking of familial likeness, Naruto canonically doesn't look like Minato aside from the hair. Kushina verbatim tells Naruto this and says that he has her face, which means that Naruto looked like a lady most people wouldn't recognize. Also, the whole Naruto having the name Uzumaki instead of Namikaze thing for protection isn't in the manga to my knowledge, so it's pretty much irrelevant to me, especially when we've established that only a few people even knew Kushina existed. In the canon, we get no such reasoning for his name. This next plot hole, however, is less of a plot hole and more so just Nick being misinformed and just personally wanting the story to go a different way. Nick posits that Itachi not killing Danzo was a plot hole, but his reasonings are all based on information that are either not true or lacked context. His first claim was that Shisui and Itachi reported to Danzo specifically, who wouldn't report to Hiruzen, but we literally see Itachi report to Hiruzen and the elders that the Uchiha were planning a revolt, and Hiruzen was well aware of Itachi's position as a double agent. As a matter of fact, he reported to Hiruzen directly for protection from Danzo and the elders after the coup, and begged Hiruzen directly to keep the truth a secret from Sasuke. He then claims that killing Danzo would then stop the coup because he was the one stopping Hiruzen from getting information of the coup, and with him gone he would be able to deal with the situation bureaucratically, but as I just said, Hiruzen was getting reports from Itachi and he already tried to negotiate. It's directly stated that Hiruzen tried to resolve the situation through other means and opened up negotiations to work out a compromise, but time ran out. Killing Danzo would essentially do nothing but make the situation worse and put Sasuke at risk, because a misconception that people have was that the deal Itachi made was for the massacre itself to happen, but in actuality the deal was specifically for Itachi to be the one to do it. The massacre was gonna happen either way. Danzo said that there was a way to spare Sasuke prior to the revolt. However, if he witnesses a Konoha shinobi wipe out his clan, he'd have vengeance for the Leaf and they'd have to take him out as well. However, if Itachi was the one to do it, he'd bear the burden of the entire operation, and all of Sasuke's hatred would be directed at Itachi, keeping him safe from Konoha. If Itachi just kills Danzo, then either the massacre or the coup still happen, which would still put Sasuke in danger, and also killing a Konoha official is not very smart when you need Konoha to protect your brother. This next one is pretty straightforward. The plot hole in question is why Naruto doesn't use his healing abilities he used on Kakashi anymore, and the answer is pretty simple. It went back to the dude who gave it to him. This is because what Naruto did wasn't healing, it was a minor application of yin-yang release, which is stated in Data Book 4 to be Hagoromo's power, which is why when we see him use the Sun Seal to do it, he describes it as taking a part of Kakashi and subsequently creating a new eye using reality warping. The seal then goes back to Hagoromo after they seal Kaguya, since it was originally his power. Now this next one is a bit more interesting, and it's why Obito didn't go for Naruto after the Nine Tails attack. Now there are two ways you can go about this, the technical answer and the narrative answer, but to make this a bit more fun, let's go with the narrative. You see, after Rin died, the world changed for Obito and it became like hell. So he took Madara's identity and he walked the world looking for a reason to not follow through with the plan. This is why he did everything in such a roundabout way, because he was searching for a reason to be wrong. And we see this in the fact that he started the 4th Great Shinobi War when he realistically didn't even need to do that, but he wanted the world to prove him wrong. That's also why he kept trying to break Naruto, pressing him for answers, because if he pushes him far enough, he may find what he's looking for. There is also the technical answer, which, if I'm being honest, the reason I didn't do that is because I'm lazy and this video was dragging on a bit too long, but I promise you I'll give an entire in-depth explanation in its own separate video. However, the final plot hole in this video is one that straight up made me double take. The plot hole is that Jiraiya could have been revived in the 4th Great Shinobi War. Nick makes the argument that Jiraiya's blood is all over the Hidden Rain village, but Jiraiya only ever got injured at the harbor. and it constantly rains at the rain village, so whatever blood would be near the harbor would be washed away into the ocean. He then says that his blood was still on Pain's chakra rods, which doesn't really matter since why would Pain give Kabuto his chakra rods with the Jiraiya's blood on it when they weren't allies? At that point in time, Kabuto was still allied with Orochimaru, who was distinctly an enemy of the Akatsuki. Plus, why would Pain keep the dried blood of Jiraiya on his chakra rods? He also claims that Jiraiya's arm probably didn't sink to the bottom of the ocean, but it's heavily implied by the page that it was one of the things that fell into the water with a sploosh. He also doesn't seem to understand why they couldn't retrieve his body from the sea, but it's stated that the problem is the pressure of the sea, not Kabuto's diving ability. And remember, Kabuto was not a member of the Akatsuki, so he was doing this all on his own, so he couldn't ask Konan or Kisame for help. But with that, it brings us to the end of this video. I had a lot of fun making this. Please don't take any jokes to heart, it's all anime. Anyway, stay tuned for the Battle IQ video, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll catch y'all in the next one. Bye B.